Now I come directly to the opening of the Ukrainian section. Because shortly after the inauguration of the Russian service in 1950, External Affairs asked Canadian diplomats in London and Washington to provide some opinion from the British and Americans about the Ukrainian nationalism and the advantages of the Ukrainian shortwave program in the present Cold War. In this memo, the Canadian government, one of the officials of the External Affairs noted that Ottawa found the whole Ukrainian issue perplexing and felt that, quote, the greatest caution must be exercised in exploiting Ukrainian nationalism either now or in wartime, end of quote. And can you put the next slide, please? Is it? No, I probably did. No, that's okay. So sorry, you can leave it there. And I'll continue quoting this. I thought that I put it, but I didn't anyway. So this is the quote from this memo about the Ukrainian nationalism and how worried were External Affairs about this Ukrainian nationalism. First of all, there are in Canada important political aspects to the question arising from the existence of various rival Ukrainian organizations embracing the large numbers of Canadian citizens. Furthermore, the experience of the two great wars has left a legacy of the greatest reluctance to make promises or even mild hints of support for the future independence for national minorities. Finally, we feel that the risk of losing more than it is hoped to gain must be weighed very carefully. It is arguable that by appealing to and possibly pleasing one Ukrainian, we may antagonize 2.5 Russians. So it was really for External Affairs, they had taken a really firm position of opposing the broadcast in Ukrainian language. And mainly the reason is because, well, they didn't want to break this balance that they had in broadcasting in Russian language. But it wasn't External Affairs issues that really played the decisive role in the opening of Ukrainian broadcast. It was Canadian internal policies, and namely, I guess it's not hard to guess, it was the very strong lobbying on behalf of the Ukrainian community to open the section in Ukrainian. For instance, on June 23rd, 1951, Women Ukraine published an editorial appealing to its readers to send petitions and letters to External Affairs Minister Lester Pearson and to the CBC manager in favor of Ukrainian broadcasts. On its front page, they published a letter in English addressed to Pearson with a blank space at the bottom for signature. The newspaper also called for the creation of regional committees to help in the lobbying process. And Ottawa, well, the official Ottawa was bracing itself for a flow of letters from 350,000 Ukrainians or Ukrainian Canadians. But they were, the External Affairs was heartened by what they called an indifferent response, because they received only 4 or 5 petitions. But obviously it was too early to make any conclusion, because on October 19th, External Affairs Minister Pearson received a letter from the Secretary General of the Canadian League for Ukraine's Ukraine's liberation, calling for the inclusion of the Ukrainian language broadcasts in the Voice of Canada that was at that time broadcasting in 13 languages. And with that letter came a binding case containing sheets with 11,741 signatures. And the petition carried a reminder, if one needed a reminder, that Ukrainian Canadians are the largest racial group and one of the fundamental ethnic elements of the Canadian nation. And this quote is the reaction of the External Affairs to this letter and the case, because they said that even the name of the organization, Canadian League for Ukraine's Liberation, confirmed the earlier fears that they had about this Ukrainian nationalism. So I'll just quote the first. Much of the Ukrainian Canadian reasoning submitted in support of the plea for Ukrainian broadcasts was sophistry behind which lurked the desire to forward the cause of Ukrainian independence, that is, dismemberment of the USSR. And while all these debates within the external affairs were taking. No, I'll just say that after this petition, Lester B. Pearson decided, in spite of all this opposition that external affairs voiced, he decided to go ahead and called, not him personally directly, but he asked one of his employees to call the International Service in Montreal and to say that he would like the Ukrainian broadcast begin as soon as possible. So Ira Dilworth, who was still the first Director General of the International Service, he was obviously worried about the broadcasting policy, because he as a director, he had to although the International Service never had censure or editorial control, but still he was responsible for what was going out, because it was Canada's voice internationally. So he said that the way he understood it, that Ukrainian broadcasts would not represent a sort of separatist movement, and that Canada would be broadcasting to the Soviet Union in Ukrainian, and not broadcasting to the Ukraine as a separate part of the USSR. So, and this became a main policy formulation for broadcasting in Ukrainian by international service. And since he received the clear instructions from the top, he proceeded to putting in place the service. And what he did, he sent his representative to Washington to have some consultation with the Voice of America, who was already broadcasting in Ukrainian at that time. BBC, they didn't have broadcasting in Ukrainian until 1991 or 92, when Ukraine became independent. So Canada opening an foreign service broadcast in Ukrainian, it was really a very important event. So this representative of International Service of CBC, he went to Washington and he came back with some suggestions about what the broadcasting policy should be. Okay. What content of programs should be, and what the position of the management of the International Service should be vis-a-vis what they saw as very active Ukrainian lobbying, because obviously they were monitored what was going on. So he came back, and this is what he suggested. He said that American programs are definitely programs to the USSR in the Ukrainian language and not directed to the Ukraine as a separate political unit. Any difference between Ukraine and the USSR stressed in these broadcasts are of cultural rather than of a political nature. On the political side, the general fight for freedom and the struggle against communism are emphasized. All national aspiration must be left to the people themselves, who in the end will decide if and when the proper time comes, whether they want to become independent, join in a federation with the other peoples of the USSR, etc. No reference is made in this broadcast to any underground movement or underground army within the Ukraine or to any fighting liberation movement. And he also recommended that the management of the International Service takes a very firm position with regards to various groups within the Ukrainian community. And therefore he recommended to prepare a definite policy statement containing all the elements mentioned in the paragraph I just quoted, and to publish the statement in the form of a press release before or simultaneously with the inauguration of the broadcasts. And he stressed that the necessity to conform strictly to these policies, to official government policies. And he said, as they unquestionably must. Because this is all interferences in matter of policy as well in the actual preparation of this program must be avoided at all costs. So the government, here we have this position again, the government, he doesn't intervene directly, but still the management of the International Service, like I said, they always had to take into consideration what were the priorities of Canada internationally. And 3 months later, they proceeded to hiring the staff for the Ukrainian section, and they came it was the interviewing process took place here in Toronto in 51. There were two of them. One who was a Czech lawyer, Jewish Czech lawyer, Dr. Smolka, and a member of the Russian section, Vladimir, who spoke Ukrainian with a native fluency. So they interviewed these candidates. They were looking for editors and typewriters. And the basic competence they were looking for, it was just the knowledge of English and Ukrainian. Because if we are looking now, when they are hiring people to work in the international broadcasting, they are looking at their journalistic experience, at their credentials, and it's not enough, obviously, to know just languages. But at that time, it was probably because those people were non-existent. Knowledge of English and Ukrainian was the only competence they were looking for. And I found this also, I don't know if I can call it, funny that they, all the editors were male and all the typewriters were females. And editors had a very good knowledge of Ukrainian and not sufficient knowledge of English, while all the women who were interviewed, they all knew English, but they didn't have sufficient knowledge of Ukrainian, presumably because they were born in Canada. So with all these negotiations and problems, the Ukrainian service was inaugurated on Canada Day on July 1st, 1952 by Jean Désir, who was the General Director of the International Service at that time. And Lester Pearson, unfortunately I wasn't able to find the first program. I know it exists, I just didn't have time to find it, to listen to it. This is what I found in one of the monographs written about the history of the Radio Canada International. So Lester Pearson, he opened the Ukrainian transmission with a statement that did not reflect his private apprehensions about all of which I talked before. He noted that Canadians of Ukrainian origin formed one of the larger of the national groups, which added to the basic British and French elements of the population make up the Canadian people. And he said that one of the purposes of the program was to tell Canadians, or to tell listeners about Canadians of Ukrainian origin, or who came from the Ukraine. Another purpose was to bring truthful, unbiased information about the world and world events. And Pearson added that Canada sought to penetrate the artificial wall which the Soviet authorities had erected, and the broadcast would seek to establish contact between Canadian people and the Ukrainian people.